I'm Sarah Lebeck, and this is Eric Tamburino. So, Eric, tell us a little about yourself.
Sorry, feels like a job interview. From New Hampshire, I work as technical support, and I'm a writer on the side. So I've written 3 books now. The first was Where Man and Monster Meet, which was a collection of fairy tales. And then the second was called Icarus Falls, which was more of a young adult contemporary, um, young adult coming of age type novel. And the last one that I finished, I think it was last year now, was it was called Heaven Sent, and it was in the same vein as Icarus Falls.
Okay. So, tell us about Heaven Sent. I haven't actually read that one yet. So,
Oh, okay.
the other two I have read, but I haven't read that one.
Heaven Sent is a book about um, a teenage girl who suffers a loss and kind of how to, I wouldn't say it's how to deal with death, but more just like a kind of spectator watching someone go through it. It takes place a year after her boyfriend dies. Actually, technically her ex-boyfriend, but it was one of those quick, close breakup and then close death after it, just to make it a little more murky. Um, but yeah, no, and it's about that and her kind of trying to find her way back into some semblance of normalcy.
Okay, that's cool. What were the other ones about? You want to tell us about Icarus Falls and Man and Monster?
Icarus was about someone kind of running away from the past. And then I have such a hard time summing up Icarus. Like whenever, even when people first asked me about it, but like as I was writing it before I wrote it, because yeah, it's about a girl and her meeting this guy who's kind of running away from everything, and it's kind of about their friendship, and then like peeling back the layers of that. I feel like I'm doing a terrible job describing that, but that was that. And then Where Man and Monster Meet was a book of short stories. It was fairy tales, and those I had been working on when I was in high school. It actually kind of, there's a few different reasons as to why I wrote it and like where it started from. But a lot of it, like something that I thought was really cool was we had a project in high school where we had to rewrite the fairy tale because of C.S. Lewis Until We Have Faces and how he had taken this Greek myth and then kind of made it his own. And so I liked that idea a lot. And I started playing with that. And I'm not sure that originally, because the first one that I wrote was The Demon of St. Jude's Abbey, which obviously is like this Beauty and the Beast-esque thing. But after that, I very much started to move away from fairy tales, and it was more taking elements of some and then making my own, as opposed to rewriting. But yeah, so that's what that one is.
So the first book, Where Man and Monster Meet, is mostly fantasy.
Yes.
Right? Whereas the other two are more realistic fiction.
Correct.
Okay. So originally, when you started writing, what made you start writing? Is it just that class and the C.S. Lewis thing? Or what else was going on there?
It was much more complicated.
Of course.
The reason I started writing, I always enjoyed it. Like when I had to do creative writing for a school project, I was very into comic books growing up. And then I was thinking about like trying to get into that as I got older. And I did a lot of drawing when I was younger. And then I wasn't bad at drawing, but it was also incredibly time consuming. And as I got older and started to see like the realistic path that like the difficulties of that, it was just like, I don't think I'm going to be the writer and the illustrator, which there are some people who are gifted enough to do that and, you know, talented, skilled, and work hard enough. But I looked at it and I was just like, I don't think this is going to happen. So I stuck more with the writing side because I felt that I knew that better. So it would be less of a journey, to get to a point where I could actually publish something. And then Amazon made everything possible as far as publishing very quickly, which was, I have mixed thoughts on that, but I'm grateful in a lot of ways. But no, to answer your question, a lot of it had to do with kind of, I found it very relaxing when I got into it, and then I just kind of went from there and started exploring different topics and different things I was grappling with. So
Nice. So how did you come up with the idea for your latest book?
Heaven Sent. Let's see. So that actually came from a breakup, and I was having a very difficult time with it, which I left her, but it still just really bothered me. And I was away at college, and I was talking to someone about it, and he said, "Have you tried writing letters? Like, don't send them. Let me make that very clear. Don't send them, but have you tried writing letters?" I was like, huh, that's interesting. And so I started doing that. And one day, because I couldn't send them, I didn't know what to do with them. So I just left them in my wallet. And it occurred to me, like, how awkward would it be if I died in some car accident or something and someone found them and then like found her, or didn't understand the context and ended up, like, long story short, that they made their way back to her. What would that be like? And it just kind of, it was a strange idea, and I honestly never thought I'd get around to writing it. And then one day I sat down and I think I was like working on story structure, and I just grabbed that idea and said, okay, it would be, this would happen, and this would happen. And once you had the outline, it was like, well, maybe I should maybe I should start putting a little more into this, and it just started coming together. So I went with it.
There you go. So however many years after you started that idea in college.
Oh, most of that, yeah, no, most of my writing ideas, it's they're from a long time ago. So.
All right. So when you were writing your first book, how was that?
Painful. Writing my first book was time consuming, difficult. I actually, what happened with the first one, because I was very young when I started it, is I wrote it the way I wanted to write it, and that was great. And then I finished it, and then it took a while, and this is thinking back many years. I didn't put as much time into it as I should have. And I think I hadn't quite finished the last story, and about a year went by, and then I ended up finishing the last story, not doing anything with it because I had just started going back to college, so I didn't publish. And I was talking to someone who worked in the publishing industry, because my dad was like, "Oh, you should talk to her, pick her brain," type thing. And she actually ended up asking me for pieces of what I was writing, and then started giving me critique, which I was very shut off to at the time because I wasn't looking for it. And then it was my summer between junior and senior year of college. I ended up going out to Wisconsin to meet up with a friend of mine, and I got out of school a week before he did. So I was just out there, and I didn't have anything to do, and I started rewriting one of the stories. And when I rewrote it, you saw where it started, like 5-10 years ago. It was probably about 7 at the time. And then you saw like what it could be if you went and rewrote them. And so most of them, I think, were just rewritten, like same idea, same story, everything. There was one that I just had to, it was like there was one scene that I kept and just stripped the rest of it and started from scratch.
One?
Yeah, the werewolf one. That I was just like, this is terrible. And so I rewrote that, and I think it came out better. Yeah, and then so it got a little more interesting, because at that point I was, so fast forward, I'm rewriting all these things, and then it got to I had been working on this thing for about 9 years, and I was right about to get married. And my dad, again, said, he was like, you've said that you're a writer for almost 10 years now. Like, are you ever going to do something with it? Like, are you going to finish this?
Mm-hmm.
And at the time when you're engaged, everything's very busy and you have to, this, that, and the other. And I was just like, I have no time now.
Mhm.
So thinking that the first year of marriage wouldn't be busy at all, I said, I'll make a deal with you and give me until my first anniversary. And if it's not done, I'll just drop it. Like if I don't have a finished product. And that actually, it really put me in gear. I didn't think about it during the engagement. And then once we were married, I started trying to really finish those rewrites, really go through, look for editors, get editors, look at self-publishing versus traditional publishing and the pros and the cons. And then, everybody asks me, oh, why did you self-publish? And it's like, well, when you took 10 years to write the book, I just got impatient. I was like, the chances of someone wanting this anyway, the market, the publishing industry is very difficult. And for me, it's more, about the fun of writing it. And, it'd be great to have a huge fan base, but, it is what it is.
Right.
And the more I started looking into the traditional publishing industry, it was like, unless you're in the top 5 that they pick for a year, it's kind of, you get a stipend. It could be $2,000, it could be $5,000. And it's like, you buy your own copies, set up your own events, do your own marketing. And it's like, well, if I'm going to do that anyway, I might as well just do it myself. So,
right.
So that was my decision into self-publishing. But
so after writing your third book, what's the big change? Like you're still self-publishing,
yep.
But I assume it's much different than how you write your first book.
It's much more streamlined. I know what I'm doing a little bit. Always looking for editors. That is something I love. That I made a mistake of putting that I was a self-published author on my resume, which you should never do unless you want to get into editing, because telling stories and editing stories are very, very different. And
yes.
And everyone thinks that you're an editor.
Freya, go lay down.
But yeah, so what do I do differently now? Most of it's the same. I'll figure out what I want to write about. I'm not very much by the seat of your pants. So I'll map out what I want to write about, write it, and then once that happens, I'll go through the cover design, because I do the cover design myself at this point. I've been on the fence as to whether or not I want to contract that out, but for the moment I still do it. Send out the work to an editor, and then go and do the back blurb and start formatting everything for the print and for the Kindle. But the process itself, what's changed about my writing, I think I tend to recommend. Now, I hated short stories for a while. After I finished Man and Monster, I was like, I never want to write these again. And the older I've gotten, the more I've come to appreciate them. And it's funny because you'll look at people like Stephen King and Dean Koontz and stuff, and you'll find out that they have these collections of short stories that you're like, that aren't super famous. And I started to realize that, okay, so like you learn using short stories, you learn to write the beginning, the middle, and the end. Yep. Because those short stories, I hated writing endings. I was always, I love introducing the new characters and the new environment or whatever. And I said, okay, learn the endings. So I learned the very quick, the loose story structure. After that, with Icarus, I feel like the real trial with that book was just, can I make something longer? And then with Heaven Sent, I wanted to push it a little bit longer, but I ended up a few pages shorter than Icarus. But the goal with Heaven Sent was more about how to write good supporting characters
Mhm.
instead of just focusing on the main character, the villain and all that. So no, each book has taken me in different places of like how to expand your toolbox of writing.
Uh-huh.
There was another story that I've started working on, but I'm not sure what I'm going to do with it. But I actually had someone, a friend of the family, reach out to me, and they were like, "Hey, I'm working on writing a book. Would you be willing to take a look at it? Is there anything that you can teach me?" So I know very little in my opinion, but it was like, all right, you know what? He reached out. Cool. So I started teaching him, and he was very into world building.
Okay.
So I started writing my own story because I doing a lot of short stories, and then so doing the short stories in a fantasy world, and then doing the longer stories in the real world. I didn't have to world build in the real world. And so that was something that I think a lot of people are very attracted to world building, and I was always very removed from that. So I started working on a little story that it was like, all right, if I was going to world build, if I was going to write an epic saga and had to build my own world, how would I do that? And I started watching different YouTube videos and stuff for not ideas, but like learning that side of the skill craft. And yeah, so I actually became loosely attached or reasonably attached to that story, and it's on my. I'm kind of in between books right now. I do think if you're going to write, you really need to set goals. Like you really need to do that. But I got to this point where it was just like, okay, 3 books, life's busy. I'm just going to step back a little. I'm not going to stop, but I'm going to step back. I'm not going to have a goal on the calendar for a little bit and just kind of see what happens. Because I have that fantasy one, which would make sense to do because I have fantasy and then contemporary and then fantasy again. I have another one that's much more like adult fiction oriented that I've had an idea for a long time. So part of me is like, well, you've had that longer, you should work on that. But it's like, it doesn't really fit anything that and then there's a couple other, like I've toyed with the idea of, getting back to short stories and doing other anthologies, like a little horror anthology, like, kind of Stephen King feel. And yeah, I've written 1 or 2 of those, and then I just kind of put them in a folder, and it's like, okay, we'll see. But so yeah, between things right now.
Okay.
But,
let's see. You've covered multiple of the questions just with that.
yeah, sorry.
No, it's good. It's good. So, why? Why do you write? You kind of covered this already, but I'm sure you could go into more depth.
Yeah, it's interesting because, like I said in the beginning, it was very therapeutic, and I think I've thought about that a bit, and this actually leads into something else. I'm not going to gracefully merge these. No, so on my website, I actually posted some of the writing advice that I gave to that friend, and very high level, but just little things that I learned over 5-10 years that, if someone reads it, maybe it'll help them. Probably won't if you're very into writing and you finally stumble upon me. But rudimentary. But I decided to put it into a document, so that's out there free. And the reason I bring that up is because I ended up reading this this thing. It's How to Write an Academic Paper that Jordan Peterson wrote.
Okay.
And that was very, very interesting, where he was like, what is the purpose of paper? And it's to explore, I believe I forget what the word was, because it wasn't paper, it was like thesis or something, but it means to try, whatever the term was. And he's saying, like, the idea of writing an academic paper is you're trying to explain something. You're taking a question, a premise, a thesis, and you're kind of hashing it out in a contained environment. It's like being a scientist, and having a controlled environment. And I thought that that was very interesting because frankly, papers in my world were you get grades. That's like, there was no further, like learning how to string thoughts together, maybe, but it's really just grades. And so like reading that, when I did that writing advice, like the first lesson is why do you write? And I think I was talking with a different friend of mine that like a lot of what great writers do is they're grappling with questions about humanity and about life. And I mean that it's universal and that everybody goes through a lot of the same stuff, but at the same time the position that you take, or the perspective, that's the word I'm looking for, comes from like your life and how you lived it. And so you have people who have lived these very adventurous, like adrenaline seeking lives, and then they'll write books and it's like, oh, that's really exciting. And it's like because they can really convey the different emotions or the different situations and scenarios and the psychology of it and stuff. And then you have more everyday people like me, and then you but you still you still grapple with a lot of the same questions, and you get to see different areas, different parts of the answer. And then you can use that to form your own opinion when you read. But so I still do enjoy it. I think it is very therapeutic, and I think that those two work together, where you're exploring questions that you don't know the answer to. That I actually really struggled with, where I was talking to a different friend, and I should start using names. This whole recording is just gonna be like different friend. But I have a handful of friends, and I was talking to one, and I said, I don't know that I want to touch this story because it like I don't have an answer for the reader. And he said, not all stories need to give the reader an answer. And it was just that I still really struggle with that. I was like, I don't know how I feel about that. But you think about it and it's like, oh, okay, I suppose there are some of the great works out there. And it's like it doesn't give you some black and white, like there it is. It's supposed to get you to wonder, to think, to analyze something deeper. So no, I think there's an enjoyment to it, and then there's a need for it to just grapple with whatever questions are on my mind. So
I can understand that. All right. So what helps you to write? For some people it's music, some people it's reading, some people have a specific spot.
I will say, if you're going to write, you need to read a lot. And if you hate reading, that's fine. That's why there's audiobooks. Audiobooks for me, I think it helps me more than reading, because when you're writing, you kind of hear this voice, like your thoughts kind of come as this voice, and having someone read and you hearing things being described, it helps you when you're sitting there searching, like, oh, how do I describe this? It's like you have kind of this audio inventory that you start cycling through, where it's like, no, that's not the right word, that's not the right word, And I don't know, I found it to be very useful. There was one of my earlier jobs, I had a lot of time that I could listen to audiobooks, and I did, and my writing got a lot better. Which is up for debate, but in my opinion, if you think it's bad, you should have seen it before. But so reading, it's a prerequisite in some form. You have to do it. For me personally, so my wife and I, she'll paint. So she'll pour a glass of wine or a glass of whiskey, like normal with rocks, not like a glass of whiskey. and I'll do the same, but we'll sit down, and someone introduced me to yet another friend introduced me to a genre called post-rock, and most of it, not all of it, but most of it is instrumental. And so her and I tend to listen to, I'll listen to a lot of that. I think one of my favorite bands for writing is called Caspian, and
Okay.
they're in that genre. And then I'm sorry, Mono is the other one. But the single most like influential album was called Hymn to the Immortal Wind. And that was when I was writing Where Man and Monster Meet. Like, if I ever got writer's block, I would just put that on and just like work through it. So yeah, that definitely music for me, like what helps music.
So does each book have a soundtrack, or do you always go back to the same album?
Um, yeah,
Mix
I
of
was gonna
things?
say I always go back to Him to the Immortal Wind, but it definitely after like the 150th time, you're like, where's the magic you used to hold? It's still magical, but
Mhm.
it's different. I actually had a very awesome experience where they're a Japanese band and they're not super well known, and they were over here playing a very small venue,
Mhm.
and I like met the lead guitarist afterwards and told him it's like this really helped. I'm a writer, this,
That's great.
but it was really neat. Yeah, no, I branch out. I try to stay in that genre just because I find words to be very distracting when you're trying to write words.
Yup.
When I'm doing the cover design or whatever, I'll put on anything. But
Yeah. Okay. That's cool though. What has writing taught you?
Hmm.
I know it's a
Yeah, that getting to the deep questions. What has writing taught you? I think there's a very practical side, where it's taught me a lot about setting goals, hitting goals, mapping things out, planning accordingly. Because I've never been super good at that, because a lot of stuff, like especially academically, I just wasn't interested in. So to have something that was mine and um, like all kind of fell on my shoulders, it taught me about managing and managing time and expectation with yourself. Um, it taught me about that, and I guess it just taught me a lot about myself and about just different things I had gone through and how I feel about them and what I believe about them. That's actually something that, as I've gotten older, when I was a kid, it was like I want to write, I want to like tell the world everything I know, and then as I got older, I was like, oh, I don't know as much as I thought I did. I don't know that I should be writing anything. I don't know that this is helpful. So no, I think those were the two things. It taught me a lot just about myself and how I felt about different situations. And then on the practical sense, just time management and management in general.
Okay.
So
Who are you inspired by in your writing? You mentioned audiobooks, but that's a very
yeah,
big.
yeah. Like what authors am I
Yeah.
inspired?
Or just in general.
In general, I would say so. I have to give a head nod to Dean Koontz. I've read a lot of Dean Koontz when I was younger.
Gotten into him recently. He's
What
good.
what are you reading?
Let's see, what were the three I read so far? I read The Husband. I read the one where it's about the guy. Like there's a serial killer. I don't remember what it's called. It's like it's upstairs, but it doesn't help right now. But there's a serial killer, and there's a little girl who's like trying to run away from the serial killer, who's her stepdad. And
Okay,
I don't remember what it was called, but it's really good.
It's not Door to December, is it?
No, I
Okay,
can't say I've read
that's so Door to December. Spoiler alert.
that one.
No, was a fantastic book, and I loved it. and then Stranger Things came out, and it's like the exact same premise. Like,
Oh.
if you've seen Stranger Things, it's like don't read the book. I mean, do read the book if you want, but it's an extremely similar premise.
Interesting.
But no, Door to December was really good. I liked his Frankenstein series. I only read the first 3, and then I was like, I feel like this continued because the fans demanded it or the publisher demanded it, and I just stopped there.
Some things are a perfect trilogy and they keep going and you say no.
No, exactly.
I actually recently acquired the Frankenstein trilogy though, so that should be.
Yeah, no, I really, really enjoyed that. So no, he was hugely influential. And then I think someone else that I reference in that writing class, I think the most useful book that I read on like about writing is called Invisible Ink, and it's by Brian McDonald, if I remember his name correctly. But it's one of those, I'd never heard of it. I had never heard of him. I think he's a screenwriter.
Okay.
But he had a lot of like really, really useful information. The other one, so he did a lot of like tools where like, how do you use good side characters? What's the purpose of, like how to write a good hook? What's the purpose of, like, how to not break your own rules, like within the world that you set up, stuff like that. That it's very word I'm looking for. It's very like, it's not about how to write a story, like the story structure side of it. It's very just like one-off things that you can use.
Okay.
So I thought that was very interesting. The other one that I've read, which was more about the story structure, it was called The Plot Dot by Derek Murphy. Derek Murphy is very big in the indie publishing scene.
Okay.
And I've used a lot of his material, like I've found extremely helpful if you're looking to get into self-publishing. His YouTube videos on like walkthroughs and what you're going to need and what to expect, like that, he does a really good job at laying all that out. But he's also a writer, and so he wrote The Plot Dot, which it's basically a very, very simplified version of Joseph Campbell's like hero's journey.
Okay.
But it's broken. But he took that and he explains it, but then he's like, so if you're writing a book, your first chapter should be this, your second chapter should be this, and it's like very, very laid out.
Okay.
That's what I was reading when I said, I wonder, like, I just want to do this for fun with one of my stories, and I ended up doing Heaven Sent, and then it was like, oh wow, that actually, okay, let's just write this now. But yeah, no, it made it a very manageable, very manageable, just seeing it on paper. And then I think another person who influenced my writing a lot was Patrick Rothfuss.
Oh yeah.
And yeah, no, his style, I didn't actually read it. I listened to the audiobook because somebody gave me the book and I was like, there's no way I'm getting through this.
It's pretty thick. Just the first one, and then there's the second one.
Yep. So listening to those two, that definitely like influenced me.
He's got such a nice style.
Yeah. No, he writes books of poetry that, yeah, no, they're fantastic.
If he manages to finish that trilogy, it'll be up there with Tolkien.
You know what's ridiculous is that apparently the third book was finished in like 1998, and he's just doing rewrites and like editing. But like he had a cohesive like third book.
It's been over 20 years since then.
Yes. But if you scroll through, there was something, I think it was like Reddit or something, but somebody had a screenshot of his Twitter. It couldn't have been 98 Twitter, his Twitter feed. And he found the manuscript from 98 and there was a sticky note on it. It was like done. And he's like, oh, just, haven't managed to get back to this. And you're like, what do you mean? Like, you're so close.
Oh my, I've been dying to find out how that story ends, but he hasn't published it.
Yeah, no, I've had theories of how it's supposed to end, but well, it remains to be seen.
Yeah. Mm.
But yeah, I found those. Someone gave me the first book and was like, "You have to read this," and it was probably like 5 years ago now.
Okay.
It was very recent. I
Mhm.
didn't realize that those were written a while back and everything. So, but no, that very much in props to Nick Podell who did the audiobook. But
Okay.
yeah, no, hearing his voice like
Mhm.
not when I'm writing, but just he does a great job with those characters and everything, and that really I liked audiobooks, but like that it just made it something better.
Nice.
So
All right. Well, my next question is, what is your advice for writers? I know you said you had a thing on your website.
yep, yep.
We'll get back to that in a bit. But what's something you could pull out of there?
I think the two things that I tend to push on young writers or new writers at this point is the need to actually write, because there is a you
Mhm.
start your Instagram even though your book isn't written, then you start following all the authors and then all the indie authors and stuff, and then you just scroll through everything I should be doing when I'm supposed to be, or everything I am doing when I'm supposed to be writing, and there's all those memes and you like all of them and you're like, yes, I should be writing right now, but I'm doing this. And
Mhm.
um no, so I make sure that you actually carve out time to write. Don't be discouraged by not having, like, it's like working out. You have to do it, you'll get better at it. um and it's not always going to be a good workout. There's a movie called Finding Forrester. Um, didn't love it. Sorry, guys, didn't love it. But one of the Sean Connery's in it, and one of the it's about him being this writer that this kid, like, he wrote one book, and it was like the greatest book ever written type thing. It was just this fantastic, the great American novel, and then he just disappeared, and like nobody knew what happened to him. And then this kid ends up like figuring out that, oh, you're this guy, and he's like, well, teach me about writing, because I think he was just like struggling in class or
Mhm.
something. And there's this scene where he's like, you want to write, and the kid's like, well, what am I writing about? He's like, it doesn't matter, write. And just to actually like taking that advice, where when you're sitting there and you're like, nothing's coming, I don't know what to write, like to
Mhm.
just start hitting keys, see what happens. And
Mhm.
so no, you definitely keep writing. Don't be discouraged. Like, actually carve out time, actually write, and fix your writing later. Don't
Mhm.
worry about that in the moment. Don't be doing the grammar. The other thing, which we talked about a little bit earlier, a lot of people that I meet who are new to writing really want to write The Lord of the Rings
Mm.
or something else. And some they read all the Star Wars books and they're like, that's what I'm gonna do. I really recommend short stories for starting. I think it's a great way to get a lot of ideas on
Mhm.
paper and to get them completed, because
And
that's
to hone your
another.
craft.
Yeah, no, to hone your craft as well. You'll learn a lot about that. But no, there's one other friend of mine who he has like these amazing ideas, and he just can never. He's a perfectionist, and he can just never put it to paper.
Mhm.
And to actually start an idea that you have, and then complete the idea, which happens on a very short timeline in a short story. Because that's something that people are like, well, I don't want it to be a short story. It's like, well, work on that.
Mhm.
What if it had to be a short story? You know,
Yeah.
you can always do more with it later. Um, I've actually, with some of my short stories that I've wrote since Man and Monster, I've actually tried to like um, control the word count, where it's like you can't go over 5,000 words, because if you were going to submit to a magazine, it would have to be under 5,000. Most magazines, some
Mhm.
it's 3,000, some it's 2,000. It varies, but I picked 5,000, and it's like, okay, you have this idea, complete it, and that makes it like you said, it hones your craft because you're giving yourself different restrictions.
Right.
But I think write and do short stories. Like, yeah, learn about writing good characters, learn about writing good endings, and go from there.
Hopefully you'll take some of those short stories and submit them to us.
The only short story, there was a horror story that you wouldn't want, and then there was turned out decent though. It was my first time kind of dabbling with that, and then the other one you guys actually did put on the website, which was what is that called, the Dark Valley.
Okay, yeah.
So
at least we got one of them.
I had a lot of fun with the Dark Valley.
Good.
And I'm very grateful that you guys actually published it.
Can you tell us how to find you online?
Right now, so I personally got off of Facebook this year. I decided it was actively detracting from my life instead of adding value.
Okay.
But I transferred Where Man and Monster Meet to my wife's account, so I can actually still update that. I would say if you're trying to get in touch with me, go to the website, which is just www.wheremanandmonstermeet.com. And there's a form there that you can fill out that actually goes to my email, which I check my email. I rarely check the Facebook thing unless I'm posting something to it. I am on Instagram as well. And again, Facebook or Instagram, it's just if you type in Where Man and Monster Meet, that'll get you there.
Okay. So earlier you mentioned the tips for writers. Is that also on Where Man and Monster Meet?
Yep, that's on the website. When you go to the website, there's the tabs across the top. If you hover over blog, it's hover or click on blog, it'll give you a drop down, and in that drop down is writing advice. And also I did end up I wrote an extra lesson at the bottom, and that's for help writing an academic paper. So if you're looking for help with that, there is a brief lesson on that as well.
Nice.
So,
well, thank you so much. Is there anything else that you want to add?
I think that's it. I mean, your questions were pretty exhaustive. They were very extensive. It was that's pretty much everything.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.